You're listening to How to Know Almost Everything, a North Greenville University podcast. I'm your host, Billy Canada. Today's guest is Dr. Hunter Baker, Provost and Dean of University Faculty at North Greenville University. Dr. Baker is a longtime political scholar and professor and author of 3 books, The End of Secularism, Political Thought, A Student's Guide, and The System Has a Soul. A couple months into the job, Provost of North Greenville University, just tell us a little bit about what brought you here.
Well, I would say that the thing that probably brought me here is that I went to Baylor University in my 30s to do PhD work. At that point, I had already done a lot of schoolwork. I had been to Florida State, University of Georgia, University of Houston, law school. I had been a lobbyist in Atlanta, testifying head to head with like the main lawyer for Planned Parenthood, so high stakes type stuff. And in the course of doing that, which I really thought was going to be my dream, I found that I wanted to return to a college environment. Probably because I became a Christian during college at Florida State. College had been a time of major intellectual awakening for me, intellectual and spiritual awakening. And I think I wanted to be part of that in the lives of other people, specifically college students. And so my wife and I, we basically left behind our suburban life in Atlanta and went to Waco, Texas for me to pursue my PhD. And that was a major crossroads for Baylor. Baylor was trying to figure out if it wanted to still be a Christian university. They had big, ambitious plans to try to be both faithful and amazing, at the same time. And they were working hard on that. And I kind of was caught up in the middle of it. I have to say that the victory was not won at Baylor. It was kind of an incomplete transformation, and it kind of continues that way today. But I got the taste, right? I got the taste for what Dr. Fant sometimes calls the project, right? That we want to pursue this project of great Christian higher education. And so that took me first to Houston Baptist University, where I worked with Robert Sloan, who had been president of Baylor. And then I went to another hot spot, which is where I met President Fant, which was at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. David Dockery was the president. And I worked there for 14 years. And Gene Fant approached me. This was not the only time. He approached me about coming to work for him. And by this point, this was about the 3rd time he asked. And I thought, if I don't do it this time, I don't think there's going to be a 4th time. And so I agreed. I really wanted to work for him. And I thought that this was really an interesting project, a place that maybe we could do a lot of things fairly quickly. And so here I am.
Just talking about your career and life experience, you spent your professional career teaching politics and digging into the intersection of politics and religion. Could you just talk about, as we think about things through the content of an election year, that's where we are right now, why is it important for Christians to engage in the political sphere? Why is that something that a Christian should be doing, and are there warnings for the Christian in politics?
Yeah. Well, politics and religion are very closely tied together. I think a lot of people think that's crazy to say that, but they really are, right? I mean, they are things that really bring human beings together, kind of joint endeavors. Religion, religio, religare, the idea of the things that bind us together, right? And so the Christian faith entered into a Roman world where they had a lot of religion, but it was not. It was nothing like what we think of as religion. Their religion was sort of it's bound up in the things of the world, right? It's almost like if you took the MCU characters seriously as part of the world, right? and they make everything a little more glamorous, a little more interesting, and everybody worships everybody else's gods. But there's no apologetics, there's no doctrinal disputes, right? Whereas the Christians come in with this transcendent God, right? Authoritative, transcendent God. And that's why early Christians, so many of them become martyrs, because they are totally not agreeing to participate in this original system, right? The politics and the religion are together. It includes emperor worship, right? And the Christians are like, can't do it, right? And the Romans look at them and they say, look, we don't care if you really believe it or not. Just do it, right? Just bend the knee. And they're so frustrated, right? But the Christians can't, because there is no God other than God, right? There is this transcendent God is the one whom we must follow. And so when you think about things like politics and religion, they almost inevitably tend to flow together. I mean, there are religions, I think, that would try to reject politics entirely, to completely divorce themselves from it. But I think that Christians, we have the understanding that God does give us government, right? That, I particularly like Martin Luther's take on it, which is if everyone were a perfectly sanctified Christian, we wouldn't need government, right? We would basically function in love and mercy and, without a lot of sinfulness. But the reality is we live in a fallen world. There are evil men and women who will wreak tremendous havoc, and God, out of his mercy, gives us government to restrain that evil, right? To restrain and punish those who would do evil. And this is something that we should be part of, right? Now maybe it's that we are obedient to it, or maybe we preach to it, right, to have a right understanding of God. We as Americans are tremendously blessed because we actually have a right to participate, right? We have the right to govern ourselves, which is far from taken for granted, right? I mean, if you live in communist China, you really have no say about the government. If you live in North Korea, you have no say about the government. If you had lived in Europe for long stretches of time, you would be subject to some king or monarch. We are citizens, not subjects. That means that we have the right to govern ourselves. In fact, in this current generation, it's popular to despise or disdain what we call the liberal arts, right? Come and get a liberal arts education, and people are like, what a waste of time. 2 years that I don't need to spend. But the origin of the liberal arts is liberty, right? Liberal, not left, not liberal politics, but liberal in the sense of liberty, people who have liberty. So the liberal arts are the arts of liberty. They are the arts to be learned by people who would govern themselves, right? And so if you're going to govern yourselves and not just be governed by, some person with the right blood or the right position in society, then that means you need to know some things. You need to understand some things, right? It's good if you know how to read. It's good if you know how to work with numbers. It's good if you can understand arguments and offer arguments, right? To receive and give justifications. These are all things that come out of the liberal arts. And so Christians have typically been promoters of this, right? And that's one of the things that I have a passion for as the provost at North Greenville is I want people to love the liberal arts, not to be like, why do I have to take these classes?
Yeah. It's interesting because for the Christian who is engaged in politics, I mean, it seems like those two things might be thought of as divorced in times. Like it's hard to be rooted in the truths of Scripture and what the Lord would have us do, and yet be very engaged and involved in the laws of man. The things that I think it could be very easy for politics to replace religion for many people. Maybe that's just a weird thought, but how do you avoid that as a Christian? How do you avoid slipping into, this is something that God has given us. It is like, it's a good thing for us to participate in this, but not ultimately look to that for our hope and our truth.
Well, let's set the table a little bit. I mean, first of all, you start with Genesis, where God establishes himself as the creator, right? I mean, if you created something, you would claim some rights to it, right? Mm-hmm. And God is the creator, and so he claims rights to his creation. One of the famous quotes from Abraham Kuyper is that there's not 1 inch of creation that God looks at and doesn't say mine, right? He is the creator. So there's that. And so the creator has rights. The second thing I would say is that if you look at famous passages like Romans 13, we get this vision of government from Paul as something that has authority that comes from God, right? So not just authority that we give it, but authority that God gives it, right? And so if God is the source of the government's authority, then the government needs to not be in rebellion against God, right? If it does that, it's cutting itself off from its source. And the other thing that I think about is when Jesus receives the coin, right? He's asked about paying taxes to Caesar. I want to say Mark 12. He looks at the coin and, famously says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." But he's drawing a distinction, right? Does Caesar have a legitimate zone of authority? Yes, he does. But so does God, and Caesar's authority is not the same as God's, right? Caesar's authority there's a zone here, there's some limit to it, right? But God's authority is greater. And in fact, he talks about whose image is on the coin, right? Well, Caesar's image is on the coin, but whose image is on all of us? God's image, right? In fact, this is maybe the first thing that we hear about human beings in Genesis. First thing, we're made in God's image. Second thing, we're made male and female. So those things are important. Now, in terms of not getting lost in politics, this is a big problem, right? Politics is so real and attainable. We can follow it just like we follow entertainment. People can become interested in politics almost the way they like pro wrestling or something like that, right? Yeah. They enjoy it. It's fun to hear somebody agree with you. It feels bad when they disagree with you. In fact, I can remember I used to have a gym I went to in Houston, and if I was unlucky, I would end up on the wrong treadmill in front of the wrong TV, right? And I would have to listen to this guy, Ed Schultz. And Ed Schultz was always talking about basically these demons who are breaking through the surface of the earth and they're going to consume us all. And basically it's conservative Christians, right? Republicans. These are the worst people on the planet. And we have a tendency to do that as well, right? What we need to remember is that yes, politics are important. Yes, we have responsibility to participate in it, to exercise good stewardship over our vote and the different rights we have. But we also need to remember that politics does not destroy the brotherhood and sisterhood of human beings under the fatherhood of God. That is the more prevalent reality. And so we should not just kind of divide ourselves up into political camps and alienate ourselves from each other, right? If we do that the wrong way, you get these terrible stories of Sunday school classes that break up and churches where people leave. We need to keep the first thing first, and not to make politics the main thing.
And what role does Christian higher ed play in that? This idea that we can shape the future leaders from a biblical perspective that ultimately will shape the culture, because those two things being intertwined, politics and culture. Can you just talk about the role that Christian higher ed plays in developing good, sound political thinkers that keep it in the right perspective.
Yeah. So you cannot be free unless you are virtuous, right? If you are free but not virtuous, then chaos results, right? Anarchy. So if you want to be free, you have to have virtue. How do you obtain virtue? A lot of that is through learning, right? Through study, through practice. And so when we come together in a community like ours, part of what we're hoping is that we're going to engage in this cycle of learning and practice that helps to create leaders, to create people who are a blessing to their communities, right? In fact, our mission statement talks about transformational leaders, right? And so for us, that would be transforming with a gospel kind of a sensibility, right? Not so much the assertion of the self, right? But instead based on neighbor love and other important virtues of that type. And so really, when you think about it, we didn't have to have a nation where we have invested so much in higher education, but from the very beginning, with probably the first one, which I think was Harvard in the United States, you have this feeling that this is a mission that has to be carried out, right? These are people who intend to be free. And so they need to be educated. They need to have leaders who understand some of these things. And the citizens themselves need to be capable of the practices of citizenship instead of just being subjects. And so it's always been important. And the same thing was true for the people who started North Greenville University, right? If you look at the mosaic that is in kind of that Donnan heritage area of the Plaster building, it portrays a frontiersman, right, who then engages in study and then becomes a father and a husband. So as you see this development of the person, right? And this area, which I have learned was called the dark corner of the state, right? A place with, rampant criminality and things like that, and a real lack of education. The churches got together and they said, we have got to do something. And that was the origin of this place.
Yeah, it's really good. Zooming out to even ask more questions about higher education in general, what are some of the things that you see as issues, as things that students need to be thinking about as they're getting their degree today? Things that maybe you or I did not deal with, but are realities of their future. And what are some of the common issues facing our students, and why is higher education an important thing and at an important time right now?
Yeah, well, so I've talked about higher education and citizenship. We are in danger of losing some of our civic virtues, hard-won civic virtues. So, for example, when I went to college at Florida State in the late 1980s, a value like free speech would be almost unquestioned, right? Yes, people would say that things like profanity should be restrained, or a call to do violence to someone else should be restrained. But the ability to hear intellectual arguments was extraordinarily broad, right? People could come and speak at the campus. They would not be shouted down. They would not be accosted. Students would not throw a riotous, sort of display. That just was not happening at the university back in those days. And now that is starting to consume a lot of our campuses across the nation. Now, I'm very proud to say, 14 years at Union University, I never saw that sort of thing, right? Even students who disagreed were incredibly polite and listened. And I imagine that this is that same kind of a place here at NGU. The other thing is, so why has it become that way? I think that that because we're in kind of a postmodern purgatory, where people have stopped believing that anything is true other than power. Everybody is focused on power. And so if you believe that power is the most important thing, then all you got to do is win, right? And whatever it takes to win, if it means yelling, if it means assaulting somebody, if it means shutting a building down, you win, right? That's not a healthy society. It's not a good society for sort of discerning the truth. And it really goes to some of our worst instincts. I mean, that sort of a thing, it sort of goes back to the caveman with the club beating the other guy over the head, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I win. And so I think that one of the really good things about Christian higher education is we can set a good example, not only for our students, but for everybody with whom we interact.
The concept of power being the most important thing and the thing that people are scrounging for. I mean, how do you reverse that when you see it prevalently, when you see it as, something our society is pushing towards? How do we reverse that? Is there
It's a good question. It's a good question. So there's this terrifying idea of the universal solvent, right? Something like an acid that if you created it, it would be so strong that it would eat through the test tube, then it would eat through the table, then it would eat through the floor, and then it would go all the way through the center of the earth and come out the other side, right? Some of these things, these deconstructive, postmodern sort of sensibilities are like that. They're like the universal solvent or some sort of acid that never stops eating away at the fabric of the society. All I really know to tell you is that from the Christian perspective, our answer is the gospel, right? I mean, the only... I'll tell you the thing that I think about the most with this is I think about the people of Israel. I think about their kingdoms, right? Israel and Judah, the horrible history, right? You read Kings and Chronicles and this horrendous history. Sometimes they lose the plot so badly that when somebody figures it out, people start tearing their clothes, right? Because they're so lost, right? And you read about these times when, for the times of the judges, when everybody is doing what is right in their own eyes. But what I get from all this is that the only king worthy of the name is Jesus, right? And that's where we have to look. He's the Prince of Peace. He can bring peace, right? And peace inevitably involves justice. Jesus can bring peace. Jesus can bring justice. We need to look to him and follow him instead of trying to construct it on our own. The most ambitious human systems that were ever created to try to bring about justice happened in the 20th century. For example, Soviet Russia or communist China, they had incredible justice sort of goals. And if you look at the result, you see probably 100 million people dead at the end of it, right? Totally great goal, justice, right? Human beings living in paradise. But when we try to bring that about sort of through our own sort of humanistic logic, in fact, an officially atheist logic, we see the liquidation of just incredible numbers of people. And so we need to be tempered by the understanding that we Christians have, which is that we are fallen, right? And we cannot trust in our judgment to that degree. We need to remember that we're sinful and that should restrain our ambition.
How do we win back the culture through a Christian worldview? We're talking a lot about Christian worldview this week, and just in general, thinking about the truth that we're given in Scripture, but also just the assignment that we're given by Jesus to spread the gospel, to go. How can we influence the culture, through politics, by engaging in politics, to push back against the narrative that the only thing that will suffice is power, the only thing that will bring good or that will cause anything to change is to win. My party needs to win. how do we as Christians use our Christian view politics through a Christian worldview lens and ultimately influence the culture?
Yeah. So to some extent, the first thing I thought about when you asked that question is eschatology, right? Because the way people think about eschatology will affect the way they answer that question. I'm not a theologian, and eschatology is too complex for me to figure out. So I'll give you my answer, which is, I think it really comes down to one person at a time. I mean, I think about myself. My encounter with the gospel, my encounter with the resurrection of Jesus Christ changed everything for me. It changed everything about the way I thought. It changed my life goals. It changed what I wanted to do. It changed what I wanted to read. It probably changed the kind of marriage that I ended up having and treasure today. So that was all. That was all because I met people who told me about the gospel and who through whom I learned about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's me, right? I think about another example. There was a guy in law school who I witnessed to, and I'm not the world's greatest evangelist, but for some reason I just started thinking about this guy, right? And so one night he claims I locked him in a room and witnessed to him for 3 hours. I didn't lock any doors, but we went in this room and we talked about the gospel. And he became a Christian. And it's the most interesting thing. This guy, before he became a Christian, was the most profane human being I have ever known, right? I mean, I would be embarrassed to go to restaurants with him because he's dropping so many F-bombs. You know, it's just like you're almost looking at families and wondering what they're thinking, right?
Yeah.
He became a Christian. He submitted to Jesus. And the next thing you know, not a single curse out of his mouth. None. Gone. Instantly, right? So these kinds of transformations can occur. We see the power that the gospel can have in our own lives and the lives of others. And all we can do is be faithful, right? I do not have any plan to Christianize the West or to Christianize the world. But I do believe that we need to continue spreading the gospel, and the results are up to God, right? I mean, I don't think that, if I'm sitting down with you and I'm trying to witness to you, I don't think that God is helpless. I don't think that God is looking down at me and going, boy, I hope Hunter doesn't screw this up, right? I think that there's more, right? There's more going on to God's power and the gospel than just how skillful I am at sharing it. But I do know that I have the obligation to do so.
I don't know any other way to shift gears, but we're just going to slam the brakes and go a different direction.
All right.
But I wanted to ask you about
junk food, Twinkies.
Exactly, and Twinkies. But in terms of artificial intelligence, it's an important topic for a provost here in 2024. It's a very interesting topic. I think a lot of students are wondering how it might play out in their careers, are wondering what its uses are now, what the ramifications of it might be. What are some things you're thinking through along the lines of AI, and is there a way to look at that from a Christian point of view?
I think that I and everybody in the teaching business is thinking about this right now, right? Now, I'll tell you something that I thought the other day, which is if I could go into the gym and I could take a robot with me to do all the exercises, would there be any benefit to me personally whatsoever? There would be none, right? I could go and say that I conducted a kind of a workout, but I wouldn't actually benefit from it, right? Yeah. I mean, when we ask you to write a paper on Shakespeare or American government, it's not because we're saying to ourselves, the world is dying for Jimmy's contribution to Shakespeare, or America. No, I mean, there's already an amazing number of great things written. We're doing it because we're trying to help you develop that mental muscle, right? The capacity to do the thing, right? So when Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States in the 1900s, 1800s, he marveled at the American capacity to do things, right? So Americans were not just subjects. Americans were citizens. And when Americans wanted to do something, they organized. They didn't go to the government about it or whatever. They just organized a group and they did it, right? So like, for example, I recently spoke at the Upstate Homeschool Co-op. Mm-hmm. And it's this amazing thing that just these people got together and they organized. And now there's, 160 kids on one campus and more at another campus. And just this thing is happening, right? This can only occur if you have developed these muscles, right? Muscles of thought, muscles of activity, of organizing, of working with other people. It's not gonna happen if we all become AI people, right? I mean, so if you want a really good movie example of this, watch the Pixar film Wall-E, right? And if you saw it when you were young, watch it again, right? Because what it portrays is human beings who exit center stage. Literally, there's a progression. They show portraits of all the captains of the ship, right? And the captain is becoming chubbier and chubbier and more, lazy and lazier. And the AI is assuming center stage, right? And all the people are becoming passive. They all sit in these kind of floating recliners and suck on smoothies and do social media all day, right? What you're seeing is a loss by human beings of the mantle of Adam, right? They have actually been expelled from the planet. So they have lost this mandate, this cultural mandate that Adam has. And the part of the movie that I might like the most is the end, like the end credits. They show the human beings returning to the earth, reclaiming Adam's mantle, right? And it shows them they're developing their bodies, they're becoming strong again, they're doing things, right? We do not want to go down that path, right? We want to continue to be these amazing creatures upon whom God has stamped his image, and we don't want to kind of, give that away.
Yep. So what's the second part of that? Because obviously when you're being formed in college, when you're learning something, you need to develop that muscle. You need to understand how to do things on your own. But they're going into a workforce where they might, be using it. Maybe they're taking an AI job. Maybe they're doing something along those lines. So what's the balance of, hey, learn this for yourself, but also this might be an undeniable part of our future that we need to find ways to work around.
So it's really interesting. Here's what I would tell you. I have played around with AI quite a bit because I want to know what it can do. I want to know how accurate it is. And what I can tell you is that somebody like me who has read a gazillion books and written lots of essays and spoken and done all these things, I can use it better than you can, right? because I know, I don't mean you specifically, but generally, right? I know so much more, right? Yeah. So I can put it to really good use. So, but if I had not ever done that, then my capacity to use it would be that much diminished, right? So I'm actually a better user of it because of the strengths that I have developed. Yeah. So everybody needs to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. What are some other things that are going to be priorities for you as you focus on academics here at North Greenville? What are some things that you would like to see happen? There's a lot of exciting things going on around campus and in a lot of our different programs, but what are some things you would love to see happen at North Greenville?
Well, the good news is that there's already a lot of good things, right? So as I come here, I can already sense the spiritual vitality of many of the students. That's a wonderful thing. I can tell. So I talked about Baylor a little bit earlier. There are places that are Christian colleges where the faith is still kind of a disputed thing, right? Where there are faculty who want to leave Christianity behind and just kind of become more of a private college, having kind of worldly sensibility. I don't get that here, right? What I get here is that the faculty are faithful and they're interested in carrying out this vocation of teaching the way a Christian should. So that's all good, right? My passion would be, you've already heard me talk about the liberal arts. I want to instill a passion for the liberal arts among students and faculty because of their importance, right? I mean, and beyond just the issue of citizenship, things like English and math and the understanding of science, the understanding of writing and speaking and communicating. These are the building blocks of learning, right? Mm-hmm. These are the levers and the pulleys. And the better you are at those things, the better you'll be at the things that are part of your major, right? You know, just developing that capacity to learn. One of my favorite authors, Peter Drucker, he wrote a ton of great books in the 20th century. He was probably the leading writer about management. And he said that the most valuable person is not the person who has mastered a particular skill. Because when you master a skill, it can become, it can be surpassed, you know. So for example, the buggy whip manufacturers or something, you know, but the person who never becomes outmoded, right, is the person who has learned how to learn. A person who is always capable of learning. And so to me, the sort of fundamental disciplines, they do that. And so what I want to encourage students, don't fight that, right? Take advantage of it. Don't turn your college experience into kind of like a trade school. Nothing wrong with trade school, right? Thank God there's a guy who can fix my air conditioning or my car, you know, or can build a house. I want that. That is great. But if you're coming here, we also want to develop some of that liberal arts learning to help you in terms of your citizenship, your service in the church, things of that nature.